Good afternoon. We are honored to welcome our debate panel from the National Review Institute to Old Parkland. This afternoon's debate delves into a timely and pivotal constitutional question. Has the Trump administration's Department of Government Efficiency, established by executive order and led by Elon Musk, overstepped its legal bounds in its sweeping efforts to streamline federal operations? Today's moderator is the editor-in-chief of National Review, Rich Lowry. Under Rich's leadership, National Review has transformed from a traditional print magazine into a dynamic and influential digital platform. Rich has been a leading voice in the modern conservative movement for over 2 decades, championing civil discourse, limited government, free markets, and traditional values. Please join me in welcoming Rich and our panel.
All right. Thanks so much, Jack. Really appreciate that. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you to the Crows for hosting us once again in this wonderful place. We really treasure the relationship we've developed over the years. Harlan and Kathy can't be here. Unfortunately, they have another obligation, but we're very appreciative. And our resolution is simply DOGE is constitutional. So we didn't have to spend a lot of time wordsmithing this one. I'm going to be the moderator. I have my own views on this matter, but I'm going to try to rise above those personal views. It is my assurance to everyone here in the chamber that I will be at least as fair-minded and presiding over this debate as an NFL official refereeing a Kansas City Chiefs game. So we're talking about the legal and constitutional merits. We are not going to talk about whether cutting bureaucracy is good. We're not going to talk about whether Big Balls knows what he's doing or not. We're not going to talk about Elon Musk personally and his heroic efforts to as one man, address the fertility crisis in America. It's just the legal and constitutional merits. So we're going to go 13 minutes from each side. Pro goes first, then 13 minutes from anti, 10-minute rebuttal from pro, 10-minute rebuttal from anti, and then we'll have some Q&A. You have note cards. As we hear our presentations, please feel free to write down your questions. They'll be handed up to me, and we'll get to as many as we can in the Q&A session. And I would just like to say before we get into it in earnest, debate is really important. And there's a reason we're in this wonderful place and it feels so civilized, because debate is civilizing. And even if it doesn't change your mind, it forces you to engage with another point of view. Maybe you will change your mind, maybe you modulate your view a little bit, but at least you have to engage with a different point of view. And debating is not always easy. It's much easier to give a lecture or to preach to a choir. So before I introduce our debaters personally, I would just like to say it's not easy. You know, you have to put yourself out there. You might feel someone gets the best of you. You might get angry, lose your temper. You might dwell on it a little bit afterwards. I know sometimes when I debate, it'll be 2 in the morning and I'll kind of rustle awake. Wait, that's what I should have said, in reply to this given point. Now, I'm sure debaters are less neurotic than I am, so they won't be doing that later on tonight. But in that spirit, if we could please, all of us just thank them for agreeing to be here this evening and put on a civil performance for it. I would like to thank some folks who really made this event possible: Tom and Jill Williams, David and Connie Souther, Robert and Deborah Arnett. If we could also thank them, express our appreciation. And then one last very important preliminary. When we were sitting around a table prior to coming up here, we decided we wanted to try to do at least a little Oxford-style debate this evening, which means we're going to have an informal vote. We're going to have a raise of hands on what people think of this question before we get started. We can't do a real count. We don't have any digital voting, but we'll eyeball it. And And then afterwards, after everyone's heard, we'll have a raise of hands again, and we'll try to discern who's changed the most minds and declare a winner on that basis. So I'm going to ask, think about this before you raise your hands. I'm going to ask you whether you think DOGE is constitutional to raise your hands. I'm going to ask you if you think DOGE is not constitutional to raise your hands. And I'm going to ask you if you don't know to raise your hands. And then we're going to eyeball it and try to have it imprinted on our brains and ask it again an hour from now. So, how many people in the room think DOGE is constitutional? Raise the hands really high. What would we say? Is that 2/3-ish, a majority, we would say? Probably. How many think DOGE is unconstitutional, not constitutional? Very few, very few. How many think, how many don't know? They're just here because that's a pretty good group. So, but a clear majority thinks DOGE is constitutional, and there's a small minority that thinks DOGE is not constitutional. So with that, let's get into it. In favor of the resolution this evening, we have Charlie Cook, Senior Editor of National Review. Also in favor, Sai Prakash of the University of Virginia Law School. Against the resolution, Alan Rawl of Harvard Law School. And also against, Zachary Price of the University of California, San Francisco College of Law. So with that, let's get into it. We have 13 minutes for the side in favor of the resolution. And Sai, I believe you're speaking first.
Well, thanks so much to Harlan and Kathy and Jack Crow, Chuck DeFeo, Rich Lowry, Aaron Rappa, and my colleagues here up here. And thank you to all of you for coming. My intellectual connection to National Review began in high school. I used to go to the library, bike to the library, and read National Review. And of course, I saw William F. Buckley on Firing Line. And I'm almost tempted to sit like this. Many of you know that he did that on his show, but I can't pull it off. So our thesis is that DOGE is constitutional, that the use of entities within the executive office of the president is in keeping with the finest traditions of our government. Our claim isn't that everything the government does is legal. Everything that this government does is legal. I think too often in the past several decades, much of what the executive branch has done is in fact illegal. Either they're skating up to the line or crossing that line. I can give you examples: DACA, DAPA, the border wall where Trump transferred funds, and then of course the student loan debt relief. So I'm not sanguine that everything that the president is doing is legal, but I don't believe that DOGE is unconstitutional. I do think that they'll win many cases, but they won't win them all. So let me talk about our nation's history and traditions. Washington is our first president. He comes into office in 1789, and one of the first things he does is he asks for the books from the post office. He wants to see how the post office is doing. He's doing a DOGE-like thing. He sees where they've made money in some years and where they've lost money in certain years, and he says, send me all your receipts and expenditures. That's what DOGE is doing, right? Washington was Elon Musk before we knew who Elon Musk was. Washington was DOGE before there was a DOGE. So what is DOGE? DOGE is supposedly the Department of Governmental Efficiency. It's now part of the USDS, the U.S. DOGE Service. The USDS before the Trump administration was the U.S. Digital Service, has been renamed the U.S. DOGE Service. And DOGE is basically auditing the personnel, the expenditures, and the computer systems of entities throughout the government under the auspices of the president. The president wants to know what's going on. He has several units within the executive office of the president that monitor those agencies, and DOGE is just yet another one. And I think the reason why it's called DOGE is because there was a meme from 2013 about a dog with the spelled Doge, and then there was a Doge coin. And then, it was announced that Musk and Ramaswamy were going to head up some commission on governmental efficiency, and some wiseacre on the web said, why don't you call it DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency? And Musk went with that and was delighted by the name, and so that's why it's called the Department of Government Efficiency. There's no magic to the name. It's really just a subunit of the Executive Office of the President. So let me turn to the constitutional complaints about DOGE, and I took them from Alan's article in the Washington Post, which I recommend. It's very pithily written, and it encapsulates, I think, at least most of the arguments. I think there are 5 arguments that have been raised in about 30 cases against DOGE. There's probably a new one as we speak. First is that DOGE is a department that Congress never established. Second, that DOGE is composed of unelected bureaucrats. Third, DOGE personnel should be subject to advice and consent, meaning go through the Senate process of advice and consent. Fourth, DOGE is not subject to any checks and balances. And fifth, DOGE is not faithfully executing the laws. So with respect to the first claim that it's not a department established by Congress, they have been fooled by the name. It is not a department. It is a joke title. It is just part of the Executive Office of the President. It's not a department at all. It's just like the National Security Council or the Council on Economic Quality, or the National Economic Council. There's all these little subunits of the Executive Office of the President that work for the President in coordinating actions across the executive branch. It's not a department. Remember, it's only called a department because what? Because they like the name DOGE. It's not a department. So there's no problem here. The executive branch has created units. The President has created units within the Executive Office of the President without statutory authority. U.S. Digital Service, which is the predecessor to DOGE, was created by Barack Obama using funds allocated by Congress. That's the same thing here, right? So there's nothing new here that's going on. DOGE is like the Holy Roman Empire, right? Voltaire once said that the Holy Roman Empire is neither Holy, Roman, nor Empire. And that's true for DOGE. It's just not it's not a department, and it's not really about efficiency. It's about cutting things. They are not trying to do more with less. They're trying to do less with less, right? That's what's really going on. What about it being unelected? The entire federal government in the executive branch is unelected, save for one person. That's the President, right? The Secretary of Defense is not elected. The Secretary of Treasury is not elected. None of those people are elected. They're all appointed or they're hired as employees. And so it's true that Elon Musk, no one elected Elon Musk, but no one elected any of the other people in the executive branch either. And in truth, we didn't elect the president either, right? We voted for electors who then voted for a president. How do we know this? Because Donald Trump won the first time without a popular majority. What about the personnel not being confirmed by the Senate? This is true, but it's entirely constitutional because these folks don't exercise any authority. Right? They don't exercise significant authority within the meaning of a case called Buckley versus Vallejo, and therefore they're not officers, and therefore they don't have to be subject to advice and consent. I'll wind up because I need to pass this on to my friend Charlie here. Is DOGE complying with the law? Is the executive branch violating the law? DOGE is subject to the same checks and balances as everybody else, appropriations, funding, et cetera. No more and no less, right? They're not some entity that flies above the laws any more than any other entity. And if they're violating the law, they should be held to account for it. In terms of violating the law, as I said at the outset, we're not going to get into the details of whether the Privacy Act was violated or the Impoundment Control Act was violated. Those are things that are in the weeds. Again, I believe that the executive branch is violating the law from time to time. It's an artifact of our aggressive executive branch that spans across administrations. But that's not DOGE particular. That's not DOGE specific. Thank you.
All right. Well, I thought I would pick up from there and look at it from the other side, which is imagine if DOGE or its actions are taken before the courts. The court will not be asked the question, is DOGE constitutional? It's not going to be given our debate topic this evening. It's going to be given something concrete. But if it were given that question, the answer, I think, would quite obviously be yes, for the reasons that were just outlined. There is nothing intrinsic about DOGE that is at odds with the American Constitution. And perhaps it would be useful to go down and look at what DOGE is doing and then try and anticipate how the courts would act. So the first thing it's doing is it's performing an audit. That, I think, is self-evidently constitutional. The executive branch is run by the president. The president is allowed to ask his own department to run through to spending. It's looking at fraud. There's not as much fraud or abuse as Elon Musk says there is. They're not going to balance the budget by finding it. But there is fraud and there is abuse, and it is clearly within the remit of the executive branch to weed that out and to get rid of it without Congress. Congress is necessary in a whole host of ways, but Congress is not necessary if the executive branch wants to save money that is being spent illegally. Actual delegations of authority. Now, this is an area I think people have confused in their writing. But a lot of what is spent with Congress setting explicit terms. Social Security, for example. DOGE could not look at Social Security, say it doesn't like that anymore, and change the rules. But a lot of our government, unfortunately, this is a thing I write a great deal about, a lot of our government is full of laws that say things like, the secretary shall, or in the judgment of the president. And they set quite vague aims that I wish were a great deal more clear, aims that I wish were determined by lawmakers rather than by the executive branch, but that are not determined by they are determined by lawbreakers. It's a good description of both Congress and the president, but by lawmakers. And this matters because if you look at some of the stories that have made the headlines over the last 2 or 3 months, for example, and I know this is a silly thing that's not going to balance the budget, but it was a real thing, a $7.5 million transgender play in Peru, you will not find that in the law. There is no law that Congress passed that said you have to spend $7.5 million on a transgender play in Peru. If there were, then the executive branch would have to go through with that. But that law says something like, further the diplomatic interests of the United States. And clearly, the elected executive branch is permitted to determine what does that, or even to decide that that doesn't advance the diplomatic interests of the United States. Insofar as DOGE is looking through that and reallocating the money, it is constitutional. And then there's staffing. Now, maybe in some cases, Congress has made it clear how the staffing in the federal government executive branch is supposed to work, but not in every case. If the executive were to draw down the staff of a particular department to zero, in other words, grind it to a halt, undermine the purpose of that department, that would be illegal. But there is some leeway here in determining how staffing ought to work. And I think there's a lot more leeway, in fact, than the Supreme Court precedents up till this point have recognized. And I think we might be about to see a change in that with the overturning of a case called Humphrey's Executor, which essentially says that the president is in charge of every element of the executive branch and can fire anyone, not appoint anyone, that has to go through Congress, but fire anyone at will. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that DOGE can do whatever it wants. There are many things that DOGE cannot do and that would be struck down in a court. It can't act outside of the law or violate statute. For example, as we saw with Joe Biden's student loan ploy. It cannot close a department without congressional approval. It can't change the purpose of a department. It can't say the Department of Education is now a branch of the military. And impoundment, which is an idea that the Trump administration has become interested in, is probably unconstitutional at least in the way that they're discussing it. But a great deal of what DOGE is doing is constitutional. And the topic tonight is whether DOGE is constitutional. And I think to get to that point, you need to satisfy just 2 conditions. One, is it per se a constitutional organization? I think the answer is yes. And 2, is a great deal of what it is doing constitutional? And I think the answer to that is yes as well. So I would recommend the motion on those grounds.
Thank you. Well, thank you. You've tried hard, and I appreciate, Cy, your plug for my article and all of the arguments in it. But I think you got the ChatGPT version of the article, because I just heard Charlie really concede the argument when he talks about the things that DOGE cannot do, because it's precisely what DOGE has done. DOGE as an advisor, as an auditor to the president, finding excess spending and making recommendations to the president, whether he delivers it on a chainsaw or not. All of that is entirely fine. But DOGE has done things. By the way, when I speak of DOGE, I want DOGE in quotes, meaning DOGE is what is it? It's a back-of-the-envelope brainstorm. It's intended to de-bloat the government, defund woke programs, delete unnecessary and a lot of necessary federal workers, and disappear a variety of offices and agencies that are established, authorized, and funded by Congress. So Cy doesn't want to talk about whether privacy laws are violated and really wants to say the appointments clause that requires a nomination, Senate consent, that is all small ball, and I agree with that. But the fact of the matter is that many people have been fired, agencies have been shuttered, and programs have been terminated. That's what DOGE has done. How do you know? Because Elon Musk has said he's done all that. How do we know? Because employees who've been fired without authorization have sued. And by the way, they're winning. And courts have required that certain agencies that have been closed, USAID, the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, an agency which, by the way, I thought was unconstitutional, but the Supreme Court has said it is constitutional with a small change. But Elon Musk, notwithstanding the Supreme Court saying the CFPB is constitutionally appropriated and therefore entitled to carry on, he's taken the CFPB initials off the building. You walk by it now and it looks blighted. So the question about whether DOGE is unconstitutional isn't about who's doing it and whether they're making recommendations, but in fact they're taking actions. And if anything is certain, it's that Congress gets to appropriate funds which must be spent unless the president proposes rescissions under the Impoundment Control Act. The Constitution says that the president is entitled to make necessary and recommend necessary and expedient measures to Congress if the president disagrees with the spending that Congress has authorized or the departments or agencies that Congress has established. The Constitution is clear that it's Congress that establishes departments and agencies, and that while the president has all executive power under the Constitution, Congress has all legislative power, and that legislative power, according to Article 1 in the Constitution, clearly gives it the entire responsibility to establish departments, agencies, and offices. And if DOGE, in air quotes, if you will, working together but giving the direction to OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, the Office of Personnel Management, and sometimes to agency officials in the different departments. But the fact of the matter is that DOGE, and this has Elon Musk has taken credit for it, President Trump has given him credit for it, and many of the communications that have emerged, we don't want to get too deep into the facts here, but the reality is that there is no denying that what Musk is directing DOGE to tell OMB, OPM, cabinet secretaries is being actually executed. So it's not just a metaphysical premise. It's in fact it's a executive arm of the president de-bloating, defunding, disappearing, and deleting employees, agencies, and programs. And that can only be done by Congress. Now, you might say, well, Congress will never do it. That's another problem. But the fact of the matter is that only Congress has the authority to say, well, let's spend less. Or only Congress can say, that USAID foreign aid program that we established an agency within the State Department to do, it doesn't seem like it's so necessary now, or it's such a good idea. Only Congress can terminate that program. So it's that the Constitution says that Congress makes all laws necessary and proper to establish the government of the United States and any department or officer thereof. So even under the most aggressive theory of presidential power, the so-called unitary executive theory, that does not in any way undercut the responsibility and the sole authority of Congress to decide whether agencies live or die, whether spending is maintained, increased, or reduced. And the president is constitutionally obligated to follow the spending laws of Congress and the programs that Congress has established and the offices that he's set up. So the president's actions in running the executive branch have to be consistent with what Congress has established, even if the president doesn't think it's a good idea, and even if a majority of the present-day Congress doesn't think it's a good idea, even if Elon Musk doesn't think it is a good idea. So the unconstitutionality of DOGE isn't because it's making recommendations to the president. It isn't because it's auditing and found certain fraud, certain abuse. Maybe it has, by the way, but maybe it hasn't. It's conceded a lot of errors. The savings that it is purported to generate hasn't amounted to nearly what Elon Musk and the president were hoping for. And all of this that has been done is without congressional authority. And the Supreme Court has said in a very important case of West Virginia versus EPA that the executive branch doesn't get to decide major questions unless Congress has spoken clearly. So that if there is a subject, an executive action, a regulation, a policy, something that the executive branch is doing that has vast economic and political significance, in the words of the Supreme Court recently, that is a matter for Congress to decide. And if it hasn't spoken clearly to do it, then the president does not have the authority to do it. And if he does it, it is a violation of the separation of powers because the president is usurping the authority of Congress, and that is the constitutional violation. So with that, let me turn it over to my debate partner.
All right, well, great. Well, first of all, thanks to the NR Institute for having me. This is a lot of fun on an important issue. So I'm just going to pick up where Alan left off and amplify some of the points he said. And I think a first thing to say is that DOGE has been just openly indifferent to legality. I mean, its whole ethic has been to bring the Silicon Valley approach, move fast and break things, bring it to government. So given that it's been totally open about that, it shouldn't be surprising to find out that it's behaving unlawfully. I will say, though, that as an aspect of that, it's so indifferent to accountability and lawfulness that it's often a bit hard to tell what it's actually doing or who's doing what. They're certainly not transparent about the legal justifications, if any, for some of their actions. So there could be some debate about the facts rather than the law beneath the surface here. But all that said, it seems to me that DOGE's actions, or at least the actions it's encouraged others to take, fall afoul of the Constitution, at least 4, possibly 5 key respects. And so the first, I would say, is that DOGE has effectively eliminated some agencies and offices created by statute by Congress. They may exist in some sort of husk form, but they've been sort of zombified, gutted. I mean, Elon Musk said that he fed them through the wood chipper, fed USAID through the wood chipper. Now, I imagine there are probably some small government types here, folks who might like to drown parts of the federal government in the bathtub, as Grover Norquist said, or maybe feed them through the wood chipper and then drown them in the bathtub. But I think, as Alan was suggesting, right, there's a right way and a wrong way to do things, even drowning something in a bathtub. And abolishing an agency is not something that executive officials can do on their own. Congress creates agencies by law. Only it can abolish them. And even if you don't care much for these agencies, you should worry about how other presidents might use this power. So that's the first problem. I think a second is that DOGE has fired staff in violation of civil service protections and the required procedures for reducing the government workforce. In fairness, it's sort of complied, or it's at least focused on people who are probationary. That's a pretty perverse focus because it means they've often been firing the more competent new hires and leaving probably less effective underperformers in place. But even with that framework, it's gone well beyond what the relevant statutes contemplate, and I think it's been unlawful. So that's a second problem. I think a third is it's cut spending in ways that, as Charlie was saying, there may often be discretion over how money gets spent within some broad category, but there's not discretion over whether the money gets spent at all. And it certainly looks like there's going to be money that Congress intended to be used for certain purposes that's not going to be spent by the end of the fiscal year, and that's a third violation. And then fourth, DOGE has also violated Congress's power of the purse, its power over money, in the opposite direction. In at least one situation, it's offered employees these buyouts to try and get people to leave. Those had no legal basis, no appropriation supporting them, and obligating funds without an appropriation is a federal crime. So that's a fourth violation. And so, why should you care about all this, even if you're, you're sympathetic to DOGE's goals, want to see government trim back? I think the problem is these violate absolutely fundamental powers of Congress. It's Congress, as Alan was explaining our system, that decides what resources and capacities and responsibilities the government has. And it's through the exercise of those powers, particularly the power of the purse, that Congress has an ongoing say in how delegated authorities, statutory authorities given in the executive branch are exercised. So if you're worried about runaway government delegation and powers being abused, you should care a lot about these congressional powers, because this is how Congress exercises an ongoing constraint on what the government does. And DOGE is undermining these key congressional powers. And we can get into this more, but there's nothing in the unitary executive branch theory that supports this. Unitary executive branch is about the president having control over administration, ensuring that it does what it's supposed to do. It's not a power to disregard what tasks Congress gives to the executive branch. So those are four key problems. The fifth one is the Appointments Clause issue. And, it's possible, as Cy was suggesting, if DOGE is just being purely advisory, it's not doing anything itself, then maybe it's not exercising significant authority. It doesn't look that way from what's been going on. Even some things in the executive orders seem to suggest DOGE people have real power, but maybe it's just advisory. I would just point out there that this is an issue that has come up in prior administrations, so-called czars, people who are notionally just advisory, but really exercising power. President Obama, I think it was John McCain, said he had more czars than the Romanovs. Given what Musk is doing, if this counts as advisory, I think he's out Romanov. Trump is out Romanov to Obama. So just to sum up, I think DOGE has violated the Constitution in at least 4, if not 5 respects. It's destroyed agencies that Congress created. It's cut staff illegally. It's cut spending illegally. It's spent money illegally. And it may have exercised government power without a proper appointment. And these are all violations that matter. They're precedents that damage central congressional authorities. They'll make government less accountable and responsive in the future. You might expect this sort of lawlessness from, say, a progressive prosecutor. It's not something conservatives should support. Conservatives should care about preserving constitutional arrangements, preserving our rule of law culture. DOGE has undermined those things. So for that reason, you should all oppose the motion on the table. Thank you.
John, say.
So this was great. I think they might have conceded that the advice and consent thing is a red herring. There are people in Washington that are far more powerful than cabinet heads. They're called the chief of staff. Sometimes they're called the first spouse. And they can call an agency and ask them to do something. And the agency head thinks, if I don't do this, the president's going to be mad, so I think I'll do it. But there's no legal obligation to follow what the chief of staff says or what the first spouse says. DOGE is exactly like that. And so there's no authority that DOGE has. The administration's position is that DOGE has no legal authority. It's just that when you get a call from Elon Musk, you're probably going to pay attention to what Elon Musk says. because you fear that the president will back Elon Musk if there's a fight. There have been instances where department heads have said no to Elon Musk, and that tells you that there's no legal obligation to follow what Elon Musk says. So I think DOGE is just a distraction. I think most of the arguments our opponents are making really turn on underlying statutes that are independent of DOGE. That is to say, if a statute requires that USAID expend $50 billion a year, then I too believe that USAID must spend $50 billion a year. And that's true with or without DOGE. Right? DOGE just doesn't say anything about that whatsoever. And if I were going to go through, I think Zach's helpful list, I'd say, there's this question about when you have an agency authorized by Congress, what's the minimum level of personnel that you need to satisfy the statute? And it turns out that Congress has been far more attentive to maximum personnel levels. They have a ceiling for several agencies. They don't apparently have a minimum for any agency. Now, I think if you had one person at USAID, I think that would be a problem. Is 10 a problem? Is 100 a problem? It's not obvious to me that you need 1,000 just because there is 1,000. There's no statute saying that you have to have 1,000 people within a particular agency. Again, there are maximums, not minimums. The fired staff, the same sort of similar point, that there is a reduction in force authority in statute for agencies to reduce their size. I think it was last used during the Reagan administration. It hasn't been used in a long time because people come into office and don't really think about whether these agencies and these departments are the proper size. Again, there'd be some question about how far they should go, but I don't think the current level of staffing in all these departments is statutorily mandated. Spending cuts, I agree with whatever's been said up here about if Congress requires spending, it's got to be spent. But I think some statutes have some flexibility in them, and when you use that flexibility, you've done nothing wrong. And so it's going to be a statute by statute examination of whether the executive branch has flexibility or not. And again, I don't believe that everything the government is doing is constitutional, but I don't think it's automatically unconstitutional if they don't spend every single dollar. The buyout question that Zach raised is very interesting. I too don't know what authority they relied upon to offer people money to quit. And then, as I said earlier, I think they've conceded the appointments clause question.
I want to make it clear, I think this is really important, that the argument that is being advanced here is not an argument that Congress should be impotent and that the presidency should be more powerful. Those of you who read me will know that it's not an argument I would be likely to make of all people. We heard about West Virginia v. EPA. I love that case. I can actually, and this is how sad I am, remember where I was when that case was decided. I was sitting having breakfast in a McDonald's, and somebody texted me and said, West Virginia v. EPA is out. And I read it, and I was thrilled by it. I have been, for a long time, on something of a jihad against executive usurpation, most notably with the student loan bailout that the Biden administration tried. So the argument here is not, which you will hear in some quarters, left and right, that if Congress doesn't act, or if Congress is full of children who just squabble all day, or if children can't get its act together, the presidency has to go in and fill the gap. That is not remotely my view. It's not the view that's being advanced here. The view that's being advanced here is that Congress has moved back from its role as the prime giver of laws and has delegated deliberately, wantonly, to the executive branch. And that is just as true now that Donald Trump is president as it was true 3 years ago when Joe Biden was president, or when Barack Obama was president, or George W. Bush before that. Now, a good way of thinking about this, I think, is to distinguish between how laws are written when they're clear and how laws are written when they're not. There is an act from 1934, the National Firearms Act. Many of you will be familiar with it. One of the things that act does is it sets up a process by which certain sorts of firearms can be obtained. You have to have what's called a tax stamp to get them. Machine guns, silencers, ridiculously. Now, this is annoying to people on left and right because the law is really well written as a law in that all of its terms are explicit. including the amount that you have to pay to get the tax stamp to get a particular gun. It's $200. It was $200 in 1934, and it hasn't been amended, so it's $200 now. And that annoys people on the right because they don't think it should be any dollars at all. It doesn't allow the executive to get rid of it. And it annoys people on the left because $200 in 1934 was a lot more. It was a lot more of a disincentive to buy certain guns. Now, that law is written how I think all laws should be written. Forget the merits of it. I wouldn't have the National Firearms Act personally, but all laws, in my view, should be written like that. They should be really clear. The terms of them, what they're trying to achieve, what can be done, how many staff must be hired, have minimums as well as maximums, have the exact number of taxes or what you will. But they're not. They're not. That's not the country, unfortunately, that we live in. And as a result, there is an enormous amount of room for the executive to make spending decisions because Congress has said all you have to do is spend that money. Now, I agree with one criticism that was made, which is that the president can't not spend the money. But there's a timing element to this, because if you say we're not going to spend money on a certain thing, for example, millions of dollars on Politico Pro subscriptions, whether or not you think that's a good idea or a bad idea, the government was spending, was it 10, 20, 30 million dollars a year on subscriptions to Politico magazine. That's not in the law. So the president says, we're not going to do that. Then what happens? Well, they then have to decide what they're going to spend it on. But that's not instant, and nor should it be instant. So I think we don't want to jump ahead and say, well, because we've made certain cuts, we are therefore intending to refuse Congress's spending well. And I think what is really the key point that needs to be made here is that if you follow the logic of this through, if we have conceded that the existence of DOGE is constitutional per se, but that it will sometimes do illegal things, then we ought to look at it in much the same way as we look at the presidency. Because presidents, and I don't want to shock anyone here who's of a nervous disposition, but presidents sometimes act illegally and unconstitutionally. But we wouldn't conclude from that that the presidency is unconstitutional. We would say, no, the president is an office within our system, and sometimes that president does things that are illegal, and when he does that, we should oppose it and take him to court and win. I think DOGE should be seen in the same light. I think we have demonstrated that the office itself, and it's not really an office, it is a meme. The office itself is nothing more than a way of describing certain actions that are taken by the president. A lot of those are constitutional. Some of the time it is behaving illegally, as all presidents do. That is how the American system works. There are processes to work it out. So DOGE is constitutional, but needs to be trimmed at the edges where it's not, and we need to keep the same level of alarm at its actions as we would any other.
By the way, it's just our luck institutionally that if the federal government decides to spend tens of millions of dollars on a subscription, it's to Political Pro and not National Review. That's a question for another day. Alan Zachary.
Well, where to start? So let me first of all, maybe a semantic point. I mean, I take the is DOGE constitutional? I think that includes two things. That includes the entity itself, but also all the activities associated with DOGE in the public mind. So in the first question, yes, as I said, there's some question about what exactly was Musk doing, how did this work, but what appears to have happened is Musk came in, seized control over computer systems, seized control over the Treasury payment systems, and then through those mechanisms and through control over the Office of Personnel Management, got lots of people fired, turned off payments, controlled who was getting money. That seems like significant authority to me. And so the test for whether you have an office that requires appointment on the Appointments Clause is it a durable position within the federal government, and is it exercising significant authority? I think both those things are satisfied if that's what's going on. Also, even on the executive order, I believe DOGE representatives have to approve new hires that agency heads want to make. Maybe that can be overridden, but that might also be significant authority. So it could turn out that all this is untrue, and Musk was just advising other people who determined on their own what to do, but it sure doesn't look that way. And if there was significant authority, then it's an office that the Senate should have had a say in, as well as the president. So that's the entity itself. In terms of the actions, so yes, there is a mechanism. It's not quite, as I understand it, conferred by statute, but sort of recognized in statute and then embodied in regulations. There's this power to make reductions in force. But that requires going through procedures that DOGE did not even attempt to follow. Now the administration has been asking for proposals for reductions in force, but DOGE didn't do that to begin with. And even that, it's limited, the purposes are limited. It's not, you can't just eliminate workforces because you don't like what the agency is doing. It's supposed to be because you've got, say, a reduction in appropriations, things like that. What DOGE has been doing is more like what historically was known as a reorganization authority, an authority to really rework the structure of the federal government. That is something that Congress has conferred on presidents in the past, but the last such statutory authority expired in, I believe, 1984. And, again, so we've seen this with other presidents. Presidents want Congress to do things. Trump himself proposed reorganization legislation, the first administration. Congress held many hearings, did not act on it. And now there's pending legislation as well, but not enacted. So this is the pen and phone thing all over again. This is a president not getting what they want out of Congress and then just inventing executive authorities to do it on their own. This is a very bad path to go down, probably because of the concerns Charlie raised about unilateral executive governance. And I'll just go back to the point I made earlier. If you're concerned about agencies, about delegation, you should be very upset about the powers that DOGE has undermined, because these are the mechanisms that Congress uses to keep control over the way the executive branch operates. Congress appropriates money for 1 year at a time. That lets Congress every year say you can't do things, you must do things, exercise an ongoing constraint through the political process. And so if you're worried about what the executive branch will do in the future, you should be upset about the precedents that DOGE is setting.
Well, I think what we're seeing here is an effort to change the question. Our colleagues on the other side of this resolution are suggesting that the question that you were all answering when you raised your hands was whether there could be an office in the West Wing or in the Eisenhower office building that has, DOGE and a picture of Elon Musk and Elon and big balls and guys in hoodies are giving advice to the president on what they think would be a good idea and where the woke programs are. But that's not what this debate is really out. All of you, nearly 250 people, I understand, didn't come out as to whether there could be an office in the West Wing or in the executive office building that has DOGE on it with people kind of running some numbers. We all know that there have been really hardcore, important actions taken. Whether it was useful to streamline the government or not can be debated, and whether the manner in which they did it was thoughtful or not can be debated. But the fact of the matter is that lots of money that Congress appropriated using its spending power under the Constitution has not been spent, that agencies and departments that Congress has established have either been shuttered or brought to, down to the smallest little wood chips, and their offices closed in violation of Congress's power to establish departments and agencies, and that programs that Congress has authorized and appropriated and expects the executive branch to faithfully execute have been terminated. Okay? That's happened. All of those people don't work in the government anymore. Scores of thousands or some big number. Hundreds of billions of dollars have not been spent. Programs and agencies have been closed. How has it happened? It's happened because DOGE has executed that, has caused it to happen by telling people what to do. There was an important decision in President Trump's first term, where the Chief Justice, John Roberts, wrote an opinion regarding questions that could be asked on the census. And the question arose, that there was a question that was added to the census about citizenship or nationality, which was thought to be a question that might deter certain groups, certain nationalities from answering the census. And the question was whether that was permissible or not. And John Roberts, quoting another esteemed judge of years gone past, I believe it was Learned Hand, so Chief Justice John Roberts says that judges don't need to be free of the naivete that ordinary people can plainly see. In other words, judges don't need to ignore reality, and I would submit you don't need to ignore reality. And the reality here is that Elon Musk and DOGE have found programs that they don't believe in, which may be, they may be right, but Congress believed in them and has authorized them and appropriated the money. DOGE may have found employees that they believe are not necessary, but who, in offices where Congress has established the offices, appropriated the money, and DOGE has closed them, basically gutted them, and fired employees. And that's happened. Programs, woke programs have been terminated, but that have been authorized by so-called woke programs have been, shuttered. USAID has been moved. It's been reorganized out of where it was into a different location. And that is a government reorganization. As Zach has indicated, and I think Cy has also alluded to, the president has had in the past reorganization authority delegated him to Congress, and he may have it again if he asks for it. He did in the first term and didn't get it. But a reorganization is fundamentally and quintessentially a legislative act. It's a legislative power. And when the executive, be it the president or people acting for the president, DOGE or Elon Musk, usurps Congress's power under the Appropriations Clause to spend money, under the Establishment of Departments Clause to set up departments, that is a violation of the separation of powers. Article 2 President purporting to exercise Article 1 power. That is the constitutional violation of greatest significance here. And the specific, a more specific violation, of course, is the usurpation of appropriations authority and the organization of the government authority. So the umbrella is a violation of separation of powers. That's why DOGE is unconstitutional. And the framers of the Constitution, the vision for America, called for checks and balances and separation of powers in order to prevent tyranny. These were controls that the framers established so that we wouldn't be under the thumb of tyrannical rulers. Checks and balances that do restrain the power of the presidency. And as a district judge last Friday decided in ruling against DOGE, OMB, OPM for all of these termination of employees and departments, said unchecked presidential power is not what the framers had in mind. And the violation here of the vision of the framers and the checks and balances and separation of powers is the constitutional violation. So we submit you should vote against the resolution and recognize the reality of what DOGE has done and what it is, which is a usurpation of Congress's legislative power and therefore unconstitutional. Thank you.
All right. So while I am filtering through these questions, let me do a little audible on the format. I'm going to start with you guys, Alan and Zachary, and then come to Charlie and Cy, give them the same opportunity. What is a question you want these two to answer? I'll give you an opportunity to ask them one question you think they're trying to dodge or get around that you think would be illuminating.
Well, so I guess I would ask Charlie, do you think DOGE is a magic wand, which you've written about, that there is not a magic wand to restore constitutional balance and that we do have laws and a democracy? And isn't DOGE subject to those rules of law and democracy? And that what Elon Musk, okay, not a magic wand, a magic chainsaw. Did he not wield that chainsaw, and didn't he do that in contravention to our democracy and yes, law, including the constitutionality of as a law, the Constitution, excuse me, as a law?
Yeah, so the magic wand line, I imagine, is from a piece I wrote for Civitas on this topic, and the argument I made...
That's called debate research, I guess.
The argument that I no,
Yes.
thank you for reading it. So you're the one. The argument I made in that was that we still have our Constitution, and was essentially twofold. One, that the idea that Musk has been selling, that DOGE is going to balance the budget and rid us of all of our fiscal problems, is silly. And it's become more obviously silly over time. And two, essentially the argument that I've made here this evening, which is that there are things that DOGE can do and is doing that are good, for all of the reasons that we've outlined, and there are things that it cannot do. Now, of course, this is the crux of this debate. I think that there are more things that it has done that are legal than that are illegal, and I also don't agree with the characterization of it as a per se violation of the Constitution, because I think that it does not exist outside of the president. The President of the United States, for better or for worse, is making these decisions. They are being effected in his name, not in Elon Musk's. It cannot exist without him. And I think after, 10 years of watching Donald Trump, we can intuit that if Trump decided tomorrow that he didn't like Elon Musk anymore, the authority that Musk exercised would be brought down to zero. Now, that is not quite true when it comes to, say, cabinet positions, because they have to go through the Senate. The president can fire anyone he wants, but he can't appoint anyone he wants. Elon Musk and everyone else in his orbit, they are advisors to the president. What DOGE is doing for good and doing for ill is being done by Donald Trump. It is merely a proxy. So I think that while I concede your point, it just brings us back to where we started and to the disagreements that we've fleshed out this evening.
Do you two have questions for the other side? A question for the other side? Sorry, Charlie?
I'm good.
It's important to be a confident debater. Right. Charlie, you have anything you'd like to pose? Otherwise, I'll go to these.
No, you can.
No? Really?
Okay.
Okay. All right, so let me throw this, I guess, to Alan and Zachary. So when DOGE first started going, we saw a lot of folks on the right, on X, post these old videos of Al Gore saying, we've gone through the government, we've saved this much, or Obama doing the same thing. So what is DOGE doing that's any different than those past efforts to streamline government and address government waste?
You want to take it, or? I mean, one, it's a question of the facts. I don't remember Al Gore waving, a magic wand or a chainsaw around, but I don't doubt that they were claiming that they saved a lot of money. They certainly undertook, I recall, as many presidents do, a deregulatory initiative where they claimed that they made regulation smarter and so on, as President Reagan also claimed to do, and presidents try that. On the funding, it may very well have been that they were proposed rescissions, right? We all agree that the president can recommend rescissions, that is to say to Congress, you've given us spending power. In fact, you've obligated us to spend this money, and it's silly, it's stupid, or we don't need it, and you propose rescissions. It's also possible that what Al Gore and Bill Clinton were talking about, if they were talking about it, which I don't recall, it may have been in the budget for the next year. So in other words, the president every year, as every school child knows, right, or should know, it's for the president to propose and Congress to dispose, other than DOGE. So it may very well be that what they were talking about was the budget that the president submits every year about February, and they're always, claim to be cutting things, and then maybe they are suggesting that, and then Congress adds them back. So it may have been about that. So one last point, I get just usurp a comment here on the alter ego point that Charlie raised before. I concede DOGE is the alter ego of the president. I concede that. He is the president, and I want the audience to understand, the president does not have the authority to usurp Congress's spending or appropriations power, or office establishment power, the power to organize the government. The president, Donald Trump, cannot do that. So I concede alter ego, that DOGE is the alter ego of the president doing the president's bidding. The president does not have that power. And honestly, that's not controversial. It is not controversial. Senator Mike Lee, Senator Mike Lee, Representative James Comer, two Republicans, have introduced a bill, I think it's called the Reorganization Act of 2025, to do exactly what President Trump and DOGE want to do. Okay, that's introduced in Congress. If it's passed and the president gets authorized, Trump can do it, DOGE can do it. I'd concede that too.
So, quick question for Charlie and Cy. So, if DOGE is posting on his website, we have saved this amount of money, doesn't that speak to an intent that they don't want to spend, or they think they're not going to spend money that's been duly appropriated by Congress?
I mean, I think it turns on the underlying statutes. Again, if Congress says you have to spend every penny of this $50 billion appropriation, then I agree with my friends here that they have to spend it. But not all statutes are written that way. I think some statutes say up to a certain amount, and then that implies, to my mind, a certain amount of discretion as to how much is going to be spent. And so I think, as I said earlier, you've got to go through each statute line by line and see whether there's discretion or not. I agree with Charlie that a lot of, the modern government is characterized by broad delegations to the executive, and then layered on top of that is aggressive readings of statute where the executive goes even further. That might be going on with respect to some of these things, but I wouldn't blame DOGE. I blame the department heads. They are the ones making these decisions, not DOGE. We know that because sometimes they tell DOGE, take a hike, we're not going to do what you say. And then either they win or they lose, depending on what President Trump's feeling on the matter is.
So let me focus a couple of minutes we have left. Let's focus in on USAID. I'll come to you guys first and then to you guys. So Elon Musk, again, this sort of goes to what they're saying. He didn't say, oh, I consulted carefully with the correct authorities at the State Department, and we're going to address the bloat at USAID. He said, I have fed USAID into a wood chipper. USAID is not going to exist, or effectively, as the point they were making, it effectively is not going to exist as it was intended after this weekend. So how possibly does DOGE have, or Elon Musk have the authority to do that?
Is the question, how does Elon Musk have the authority, or how does the executive branch have the authority?
Well, Elon said he did it.
Right. So that is irrelevant in my view, in the same way as it was irrelevant when Joe Biden lied and said he was doing student loan forgiveness after all. This is a very strange thing presidents have started doing, which is trying to convince the public they're acting illegally. They should be doing the opposite. But after the student loan attempt was struck down, Joe Biden said over and over again, you probably saw it, if not you can see it on YouTube, the Supreme Court told me I couldn't do it and I'm doing it anyway, right? And a lot of people think that's true, but it actually wasn't. What Biden did was something else, but he said out loud, I'm doing it anyway in defiance of the Supreme Court. What matters is what he was actually doing in the law, which is why that wasn't litigated. So I think in this case, the fact that Elon Musk wants to engage in self-aggrandizement doesn't matter, providing that Trump was happy with what had been done. Now, if Trump had come out the next day and said, well, actually, I don't want Musk to do that, and then Musk had said, I'm the president now, that would have been a huge issue. But that's not what happened. So that part of it, I don't think matters at all.
All right, so let me come to you guys, Alan Zachary, also on USAID. It still exists. Marco Rubio is running it. There's a rescission package that they're going to propose in Congress. I assume there's USAID funding in there. I'm not sure specifically, but can't they delay funding, as Charlie pointed out with the political pro example, and then go to Congress and say you're going to pass rescissions, which is an element of the law?
So again, there's a scenario in which maybe it's partly okay, which would be if Congress has appropriated some sum, and at the end of the day, it's all spent for the purposes that Congress prescribed. It doesn't look like it's been set up for that to happen, and if that doesn't happen, then that's an impoundment, which is unlawful. But I think even beyond that, one of the things that Congress does with its appropriations is determine the staffing levels of agencies. So the firing of people is an impoundment as well, because it's the executive branch just deciding we don't want this workforce in place for this purpose anymore. And that's not up to the executive branch. It's up to Congress. And then a third aspect of it is there may be money that was not just not even within their discretion at all, that was already committed by contract or other ways, and then that's not, not a matter of discretion, and people may be able to have a remedy to get paid after the fact. And that's another feature of DOGE's shambolic approach generally. Disregarding the law and the way it's done it can be self-defeating. It means that people may have remedies to get paid, get their jobs back. If they followed the proper procedures, they might have gotten to a better result, but even the cuts they purport to have made may turn out to be somewhat ephemeral if people can come in afterwards and get damages.
All right, well, by the power invested in me as the moderator, let me say that was excellent. That was just tremendous. It's always great in a debate where you hear one side, yeah, they're totally right. And then you hear the other side, I'm not sure they're right. And that was the back and forth there. So before we get to our all-important vote, let me thank Aaron Rappa, the National Review team, everyone here at Old Parkland for organizing this event. It's been tremendous. Thank you so much. Programming note, National Review Institute is having a gala William F. Buckley dinner in Palm Beach on November 5th. This is a centennial of his birth. These events are wonderful. They're really memorable. You get to spend a lot of time with like-minded people, and we always have excellent honorees. So if you are available, then I please urge you to at least consider coming and being with us there. There's a QR code, I believe, at your on your chair or at your table. So please consider that now. So let's vote on this thing. Again, I'm going to ask, what do you think in retrospect now? Much better informed, being seesawed back and forth by these compelling debaters. Whether you think DOGE is constitutional, whether it's unconstitutional, whether you still don't know. So let's get the hands up high. Is DOGE constitutional? It might be a little more, maybe. It's a little easier to count the unconstitutional because I was small to begin with. No offense, I'm just stating as a fact. How many people think DOGE is unconstitutional? Okay, and how many don't know? I think we might have moved don't knows to DOGE is constitutional. I don't know. What Alan, Zachary, do you have any read on that? Is that unfair? Or?
Do I have to be truthful?
Yeah. Well, you haven't been to this point, Alan, so what's going to stop you?
Yeah, I don't think we got it.
I think we swayed a little bit towards constitutional, but it is
just like DOGE's savings; they're illusory.
Yeah. So next time, to be totally fair, we'll do this debate once again at Harvard Law School, and I think we might have a different outcome. But again, thanks everyone for being here. Please thank our debaters once again.